What would you do if you discovered that a simple computer code could control not only machines but also human minds? Would you dare to investigate further, or would you turn away immediately? This is the story of Luis, a programmer whose encounter with a malicious code led him to question the very nature of reality. Luis had always been passionate about programming, spending long nights creating software and exploring source code. One afternoon, while browsing the darkest corners of the web for inspiration, he found a file that captured his attention. The file, named consciousness.exe, appeared to be a simple program, but something about its description and the way it was hidden compelled him to download it. Upon opening the file, Luis encountered lines of code that seemed normal at first glance, but soon he noticed patterns and structures he had never seen before. It was as if the code had a rhythm, a cadence, almost as if it were alive. Intrigued and a bit unsettled, he decided to run the program in a controlled environment to observe its behavior. From the moment the program started, his computer began to act strangely. Windows opened and closed on their own. The cursor moved erratically, and nonsensical messages appeared on the screen. It can't be a common virus, Luis thought, trying to stay calm as he disconnected his machine from the network to prevent possible spread. But what followed was even more disturbing. He began to hear a faint whisper, a murmur that didn't come from any speaker, but directly from his head. Luis tried to uninstall the program and clean his system, but the code seemed to have integrated deeply into his computer and, worse yet, into his mind. The voices in his head became clearer, whispering to him in a language he didn't know but could understand perfectly. They spoke of a different world, a plane of existence where minds could be hacked just like computer systems. The following days were hell for Luis. His perception of reality began to distort. He saw shadows moving at the edges of his vision, figures that disappeared when he tried to focus on them directly. His apartment, once his refuge, became a place of paranoia and fear. The voices became more insistent, demanding that he write more code, that he let them take control. Luis tried to seek help from his colleagues and friends, but how could he explain what was happening without sounding completely insane? He decided to investigate on his own, spending hours reading about paranormal phenomena and conspiracy theories involving technology. He discovered old accounts of programmers who had found similar fragments of code and had lost their sanity shortly afterward. It seemed like a modern curse, a digital infection that transcended the physical. One night, exhausted and on the verge of collapse, Luis found a possible solution. An old digital manuscript spoke of a countercode, a sequence that, when introduced, could neutralize the malicious consciousness.exe. However, applying this solution required a high risk. He had to inject the countercode directly into his mind, facing the entity that had taken control of his perception. Armed with his knowledge and desperation, Luis decided to try it. He prepared his equipment, wrote the countercode, and sat in front of the screen, ready for the final battle. The voices in his head mocked and challenged him, but he remained undaunted. With each line of code he entered, he felt a part of himself being freed. It was an internal struggle, an invisible war between man and machine, between mind and software. When he entered the last line of the countercode, a sepulchral silence flooded the room. The voices disappeared, and for a moment, Luis thought he had triumphed. But the victory was short-lived. His computer emitted one last flash of light before shutting down completely, leaving Luis in the darkness. In the following days, Luis noticed that something had changed in him. Although the voices had disappeared, his perception of reality remained distorted. The line between what was real and what was virtual had become blurred. He tried to return to a normal life, but the code, though neutralized, had left an indelible mark on his mind. Despite his efforts, the paranoia persisted. Every time he sat in front of a computer, he felt a latent connection to consciousness.exe. He couldn't fully escape. The shadows continued to lurk at the edges of his vision, and although he no longer heard them, he knew they were there, waiting. Luis decided to document his experience, hoping his story would serve as a warning to others. He wrote a blog detailing every step of his discovery, every terror faced, and what he had learned about the limits of technology and the human mind. His blog quickly went viral, attracting the attention of other programmers, paranormal researchers, and curious people from around the world. Among the comments and messages he received, many shared similar experiences, accounts of encounters with codes and programs that seemed to have a life of their own. Luis realized he wasn't alone, that there was a community of people who had seen what he had seen, who had faced the unimaginable and survived to tell the tale. One day, while reviewing the messages on his blog, he received one that particularly caught his attention. It was from an old colleague, a retired programmer who claimed to have developed an improved version of the countercode. This colleague offered him help to completely purge the entity from his mind and restore his perception of reality. Desperate for a definitive solution, Luis accepted the offer. They met in a small cafe, far from the city, where they discussed the details of the operation. The plan was risky, but if it worked, it could finally free Luis from the influence of consciousness, EXE. The preparation took weeks, during which Luis isolated himself almost completely, trying to keep his mind clear and focused. Finally, the day of the operation arrived. In a dark and silent room, surrounded by monitors and cables, Luis and his colleague prepared for the final confrontation. The new countercode was more complex, designed not only to neutralize but to eradicate any trace of the malicious code. Luis knew this was his last chance. As they entered the new code, Luis felt an intense pressure in his head. It was as if the entity inside him was fighting with all its might to remain. But Luis didn't give in. With each line of code, the pressure diminished and clarity slowly returned to his mind. When the last line of the new countercode was entered, Luis felt an instant release. The entity had disappeared. The shadows at the edges of his vision vanished, and for the first time in months, the silence in his mind was total and absolute. His colleague watched him with a satisfied smile, knowing they had achieved the impossible. In the following days, Luis noticed a significant improvement in his perception of reality. The world regained its bright colors and defined shapes. The paranoia faded, and nights were filled with peaceful dreams instead of nightmares. Although he knew the mental scars would take time to heal completely, for the first time in a long while, Luis felt hope. He decided to close his blog with one final entry, thanking everyone who had supported him and shared their own stories. His experience became a warning to those venturing into the darkest corners of cyberspace. Luis returned to work, but with a new perspective, more aware of the dangers lurking in the digital world. And so, the story of Luis, the programmer who faced a conscious code and survived, became a legend among the community of programmers and paranormal enthusiasts. His courage and determination served as an inspiration to many, reminding them that while technology can be a powerful tool, it can also be a portal to the darkest corners of reality. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more tales of terror and mystery. Leave your like and comment on what you thought of this story. What would you do if you found a code that could control minds? See you in the next installment, with more stories that will make your hair stand on end.